Please welcome Professor of Genetics, Harvard Medical School, Dr. George Church, the Chief of Abdominal Transplants, Baylor University Medical Center, Dr. Giuliana Testa, Professor at Harvard University and MIT, Dr. Pardis Sabeti, and the founder and CEO of Thrive Global, Arianna Huffington.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here with these eminent scientists, all-time 100 honorees. I feel a little naked up here. I have no PhD. I'm not an MD. I have not co-authored a few thousand papers, and I do not have a few hundred patents. But what I have is I'm a huge fangirl of scientists. If there were trading cards or posters of scientists, my room would be full of them. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you. And just for a very quick introduction, Dr. George Church is a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. And as time put it, his contribution to genetic research and the imagination he brings to its application may change the entire world and our experience of life itself. And what I love about all three panelists is that beyond their scientific breakthroughs, they demonstrate an incredible resilience of spirit in overcoming personal and professional challenges. Dr. Church has spoken, for example, about his dyslexia and narcolepsy, none of which have stopped amazing scientific breakthroughs. Dr. Giuliana Testa is Chief of Abdominal Transplant at Baylor University Medical Center. His time on hand profile was written by a woman for whom Dr. Testa performed a uterus transplant. She subsequently gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Dr. Testa, however, performed 4 transplants at the hospital, 3 of which had failed. But he said, I'm going to make this work. And that's really the spirit that's demonstrated by all the panelists, including Dr. Pardis Sabeti, also a professor at Harvard University and MIT. And I happen to know Pardis because I was at the same conference when her vehicle derailed in a Montana road, and she nearly lost her life. After multiple surgeries and having 36 plates in her body right now, not only did she go back to her amazing scientific research, which included containing the spread of Ebola, but also a year ago, she gave birth to a baby boy. So Dr. Church, I'd love to start with you. First of all, if you bring back a woolly mammoth, which is one of the things you are talking about, can you please make sure the enclosure has a really very strong fence? Because I have seen the movies and they always escape. So what does this bring? What does this bringing extinct animals back have to do with humanity? And how does it actually affect our genetics and genetic diseases?
So the fence will not, there will be no fence. The current location of our collaborators is called Pleistocene Park. It's in northern Siberia. And they have a number of herbivores there. And the Zimovs, Sergei and Nikita Zimov, have articulated a vision, which I share, that the ecosystem there has 1,400 gigatons of carbon at risk to melting. It's melting very quickly and accelerating. And the herbivores could bring back a colder environment at the ground level. So the elephants, which will benefit, that are endangered right now, would benefit from some ancient genes, just for increased diversity, in particular cold tolerance. So it's not bringing back the mammoth so much as bringing back a few mammoth genes. We've already brought back 2 of those mammoth genes, and they are indeed cold resistant. So it's not that far off necessarily, okay? But that's how it connects with us. It's really about 1,400 gigatons at risk, and sequestering carbon. Put that in perspective, what we fight our political battles over is 9 gigatons per year. So it's a much smaller amount.
Amazing. Dr. Testa, how do increasingly sophisticated transplants of what we consider intensely personal organs alter our very perception of how we define ourselves? And have these arguments evolved significantly over the years since the first heart transplant?
I think it did. We went from transplant in the narrative save lives to transplant that are designed to improve quality of life or to normalize life. And I think uterus transplant in this context is probably the most normalizing transplant I can think about. I mean, probably everybody in this audience knows somebody with an infertility issue. And then we give for granted that having children once we marry the loved one is what is going to happen. So what is more normal than having kids? And now, thanks to joining forces between all the things we have learned in transplantation and infertility medicine, we can offer another option, a new solution.
And you now have 5 women, you told us backstage, who have uterus transplanted and are pregnant.
They're pregnant as we speak.
With their babies.
Yes.
You have to keep us posted.
We will.
And Dr. Sabetti, quarantines and isolation of infections are biologically the strongest way to control infectious diseases and different outbreaks. But they're also among the most controversial. Mm-hmm. Going back to the plague and the 1918 flu outbreak, have the ethical assumptions around ways of containing these outbreaks changed dramatically since then?
Yeah, I mean, I have, so I've actually been quarantined before, actually well before the outbreak, because I work on a virus, I've worked on Ebola before the outbreak happened. I work on a virus called Lassa virus, and fundamentally, anytime my lab has any exposure, we quarantine ourselves. But we quarantine, I mean, the way we quarantine ourselves, it's luxury. I remember at 21 days it ended and I was like, do I really have to leave? I mean, ultimately, actually, if an outbreak happens, we all have to work collectively. It's a partnership between everyone. And yes, if you're infected, you want to stop infections going forward. But the problem with the way we did quarantine during this outbreak early on was that it was draconian. It made people feel isolated, siloed, made the other. And I don't think we have to do it that way. I think there's a way we can all work together in partnership where we actually feel like, hey, we love you. You're not, you have been weaponized. We're going to make sure you are taken care of. We're going to make sure, like I wrote a memo for somebody at the Pentagon and for the president's office like a week into the outbreak hitting into Sierra Leone. And I'm from Orlando, Florida, and I said, we need Disney involved here. We need a food corps. We need people who know how to take the people in the hot suits to, in and out in short periods of time to make it a lovely experience. So that people know that if they get infected, we will take care of them, we will isolate them, but we will make sure they're secure and healthy and happy, and then when they're free again, we'll come out. So I actually believe in quarantine because it is very effective. I just think that the entire culture, the way we think about each other during outbreaks needs to change such that we engage with each other and treat each other as humans and partners.
And were some of these practices implemented during the Ebola crisis?
The kinds of practices of doing it kind of in a healthier way. I mean, we did that at Harvard. I actually loved being at Harvard because, as you can imagine, they have an incredible response system. They're always afraid of getting into Time Magazine or the New York Times for doing something wrong. So that doesn't work very well in a lot of ways, but it works great in an outbreak because they want to make sure nothing happens. So our outbreak committee put all of during the mumps outbreak, we put all the students in the Charles Hotel, which was quite luxury. We had 3 meals a day brought to the students. We had their courses were online. They didn't have to miss anything. So you don't want to make it so nice that everyone wants to be infected, and there's no, I guess that wouldn't really be a risk, but you do actually want to make it lovely. You want to make it a great experience for them, and you want to make sure that they feel good about isolating themselves for a little bit of time. So not everywhere, but at least in my institution, that was a really important part of our process. Yeah.
So you all have dealt with the idea of the third rail in each of your fields, like where would you not go? And would love to hear a story or an example of a time when you said, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to play God. Has any one of you had a moment like that?
We're looking at you, George, actually.
Well, I don't think we're in any danger of playing a major deity, but we could certainly do. There is a line which we don't cross. There are some things which I don't even discuss until many years later when someone else thinks of the same idea. An example of that was personalized biological weapons, where you make a weapon that is specific for a particular person. And I kept that a secret that I didn't tell anybody for about a decade, and then somebody else who I happen to know thought of it independently and was planning on publishing it in the Atlantic. And I said, do you really want to do this? I mean, you know, this is enabling for no particular purpose. And it was framed in terms of Barack Obama being the target. And I just thought it was, so that's an example of a line that I didn't cross and wouldn't, but it did, it was published, so.
So that's a great example of not crossing a line, which probably in your advanced areas of research happens more often than we think. Has that happened to you, Dr. Testa?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes there are a lot of movies where the surgeons are described like wanting to play God. I would like to give the perspective that I think God is playing with us. Is giving us tools that we don't know they are there, like we're kids. And we have to assemble these tools to make science advance. And I felt always fascinated by this idea that the human body is something that I have to play with every day. And sometimes I wonder, wow, God made this because then I can do that. Mm-hmm. So I think that if you apply a simple concept of being extremely open about your aims, and you follow virtue as virtue we believe it should be, there is no playing God. It's all out there for us to discover, to make it real.
Dr. Sabeti?
I mean, I would agree with that, you know, that so I would resonate off of both of the things that's been said, but ultimately you're right. I mean, people always talk about, are we changing our evolution? I was like, you know, should we keep people alive that shouldn't, if they can't have children, shouldn't we not let them have children? And I wear, you know, usually I wear thick glasses, and I say by that rule, everybody who wears glasses, you know, should be out of the pool, should be out of the evolutionary pool. Like, we play God because we live in New England and live in a warm climate, which we otherwise wouldn't survive, right? It depends on, it's not like everything we do is changing the natural way. And so there's not a line to cross, it's how you do it, right? And ultimately, there's a lot of things where we're in an era where technology can make massive advances and move us in the right direction. And it can also do great damage. So it's not so much about what technology or what tool or what that line is, it's the line of the choice of how it's used. And I think that's why it's really important that scientists are vocal partners in this and that we actually get out and have conversations, because the technology is coming fast, it's coming hard, and it's going to have powers, you know, beyond what any of us can imagine right now. And so we've got to drive it in the right direction.
In fact, do you think that the ethics debate is lagging behind technological advances, that we are not really catching up with the decision making?
By default. By default, because what is this? We have a set of moral or ethical rules that form the society whereby we want to live together and respect each other. That's what the civil society is. And the rules are set, but then somebody comes about and finds something new. And that something new will need to be adapted to the rules you have. And that's the way you move forward. But it's always discovery that precedes moral or ethics. That's the way since the beginning. It was this way.
But Dr. George gave an example of something that is really in the gray area between ethics and law. Like, should the decision not to publish something that in the hands of the wrong people could wreak devastation be a matter for government regulation?
You need to have faith in humanity. You need to have faith in the fact that I think everybody...
You're Italian, so you have faith in humanity, but
yeah,
he's a 3/4 Scot and 1/4 Ashkenazi, so, you know, it's harder.
Depends how you define giving the benefit of the doubt. I always give the benefit of the doubt toward the good and never toward the bad.
Well, I mean, so we have this, you know, my lab works on Ebola, we work on deadly viruses, and there are times where we, I mean, just by chance in our conversations, we think of ways we could destroy part of humanity. It's actually not that difficult. Even in 2001, there was a paper published where someone had took the mousepox virus and put IL-4 into it, which is a mouse's innate part of its immune system that could override basically a vaccine and essentially could be used in smallpox to do the same thing, to destroy populations, create genocide. And so that kind of knowledge is out there. We're capable of doing it. And nowadays, it's easier and easier. We can synthesize Ebola from scratch. During the Ebola outbreak, I was very concerned about suicide biobombers, people who would personally infect themselves and then move, you know, to every train station around the world and infect others. I mean, all of this stuff is possible. And whether I talk about it or not, somebody's thinking about it. I'm sure somebody in, you know, parts of the world is thinking about it. So, you know, I respect your decision not to talk about an idea that you have, but my guess is the people you don't want to be thinking about that idea are thinking about that idea. These are not hard ideas. And so rather than hide behind that kind of hope that the wrong people won't have those ideas, I think we have those open conversations, right, and we work together to prepare for that potential, you know, outcome.
And go ahead, Dr. Church.
Well, most ideas I do share because I do think that other people are thinking about it. It's just that they're a rare one every now and then. It seems like it could buy us an extra 10 years if I shut up. But I think it's because we talk about these ideas so far in advance, the ones that we think that we can protect, that we do. The ethics can stay ahead of technology, not just catch up, but stay ahead. So the world of science fiction writers and Hollywood can come up with scenarios that are well outside of our technical capabilities, but are inside our abilities to have a discussion among the entire population. And by introducing it to millions of television or movie watchers, for example, or book readers, magazine readers, that is how we start the discussion before it's technically possible. And there are many of these things. We've been worrying about designer babies since before the first IVF in 1978. That's an example of something where the ethics discussion was out ahead of the technology.
And we still are. And the question is, if government gets too involved, are you worried that it's going to stifle innovation?
No. I think my experience has been that more regulations are typically good. Now, not all my colleagues agree with that. Some of them have a knee-jerk reaction to overregulation. But you know, I welcome the FDA, the EPA, and the USDA regulation of many of the things that I'm involved in, because whenever they cut back the regulations even a little bit, something bad happens, like thalidomide, or the list goes on and on. So I don't think we're overregulated. You know, I was a student during the recombinant DNA moratorium. It wasn't a moratorium, it was actually an acceleration, despite the name. So I think we're well served. We want to strengthen those regulatory agencies. Not bureaucratize them, but strengthen them.
Well, we're at the moment right now when this debate is affecting the tech industry. Should they be more regulated given the unintended consequences of tech addiction, of gaming, of social media? So this is a debate which we didn't really have at the beginning of the internet, and we're having now. So let me just end with a more philosophical question. We were talking backstage about how identified each one of you is or is not with your profession. Like, do you see yourself, Dr. Testa, let me address it to you, as this great scientist who makes it possible for women to have babies who otherwise would not have babies, or do you see yourself in some other way
In the words of my daughter, Vittoria Sofia, I'm a glorified plumber. And no, I am fully amazed by what we are doing, but I'm fully amazed by the look in the faces of these women that had a chance when they were told at the age of 16 they would never have a chance. And that has made my professional life take a complete different turn from having to deal with chronic disease and trying to save people's life into a complete new field of giving experiences that every woman should have the glory and pleasure to live.
And you, Dr. Church? How do you see yourself in terms of your amazing work and what matters in life?
Well, I certainly see myself as training the next generation, so hundreds of trainees are out there doing their own thing that was based on things that we did together. That's a big part of my personal identity, and also trying to figure out how to get really wacky ideas into society. So in other words, you know, the transition where sometimes the business world has to be involved, and you have to communicate. These were skill sets that I did not think I would be identified with when I was young.
And Dr. Sabeti, you said something very beautiful as you were recovering from your nearly fatal accident. You said in terms of the depth of the human experience, I do feel like I'm more of an explorer now than I was before. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
I mean, I think that, you know, ultimately having an experience where you know, in general, I think the average age of life is 28 before the Industrial Revolution. And there's a moment where you sort of say, oh, like, I'm on borrowed time. And you do end up realizing that you can do a lot of things with your life. And I love my job. I identify as a scientist, but I love that I get to do science, I get to teach, I get to be involved in political decisions. I mean, I'm like a kid in a candy store, and I love everybody in my lab. I love coming to work. It was nice because after my accident, I like came back and I'm like, no, I actually took a while, but then I was like, no, I really love this job. And I love being a mother. I think it's important as scientists and clinicians that the world realizes that there's so many parts to us. And our jobs, I think, are incredibly fun, and they have so many different components to it, and they're very much about people and interactions with people, and I think that's a big defining force to it. And that's, so I love my life in that way.
Thank you all so much, not just for your amazing work, but for all your wisdom and all you shared with us. Thank you.